welcome to Lotus Light Teachings. Today, we're diving into a topic that resonates deeply with so many of us. Is living near your children in old age the key to happiness, or could it be a source of suffering? Together, we'll explore this question through the timeless lens of Buddhist philosophy, Zen teachings, and real-life insights. Sit back, breathe deeply, and let's embark on this journey of discovery together. Picture this: a quiet evening, a single lamp glowing in the corner of a room. An elderly man sits in his favorite chair, gazing at an old family photograph. His children smile back at him, their young faces full of promise. He wonders, did I raise them well? Are they happy? And will they be there for me when I need them most? As we age, these questions often become more pressing. Many of us naturally think that being close to our children will ease the weight of growing older. After all, doesn't family bring us comfort, care, and connection? But what if the reality isn't as simple as we imagine? In today's discussion, we'll explore the story of an elderly man who made this very decision: to move near his children in search of happiness. Through his journey, we'll uncover lessons about attachment, expectations, and the true source of inner peace. And perhaps, by the end of this video, you'll find your own answers to the timeless question: what truly brings happiness in the later stages of life? Let's begin with his story. Section 1. Does living near your children guarantee happiness? It's a vision cherished by many. The idea of growing old surrounded by the love and care of one's children, the warm glow of grandchildren playing nearby, family dinners full of laughter, and the comfort of knowing that someone is always there. This dream is not just personal. It is deeply rooted in cultural traditions across the world. But does living close to your children truly ensure happiness? Or does it sometimes bring an unexpected heartache? Let's step into this question with a story that invites us to reflect more deeply. A familiar journey. An elderly man, having spent decades building a life for his family, found himself alone in a house once filled with noise and activity. His children, now grown, had moved to distant cities to chase their dreams. The silence of his home felt heavy, like a constant reminder of something lost. So, he made a decision that seemed natural: he would move closer to one of his children. He imagined the joy of reconnecting with his family and filling the emptiness in his days. At first, everything was as he had hoped. His child welcomed him warmly, his grandchildren hugged him tightly, and he felt the warmth of belonging. Yet, as the weeks turned into months, subtle changes began to unfold. His child's work demands increased, the grandchildren became busy with school and friends, and the time they all spent together diminished. He found himself waiting for a call, a visit, or a moment of shared connection. He began to ask himself, why do I still feel lonely, even though I am so close to my family? Did I make the wrong choice? The complexity of proximity. This story is not unique. It mirrors the experience of many elderly people who move closer to their families in search of happiness. On the surface, the solution seems simple: physical proximity should naturally lead to emotional closeness. But as life in the modern world has grown more complex, so have family dynamics. The elderly man's experience highlights an important Buddhist teaching. Suffering often arises not from the situation itself, but from our attachment to a specific outcome. His expectation that being near his family would solve his loneliness set him up for disappointment when reality didn't align with his hopes. This attachment, a grasping at a particular idea of happiness, became the root of his pain. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha teaches, what is most dear brings sorrow. What is most dear brings fear. For him who is free from what is dear, there is no sorrow, whence then fear. This wisdom reminds us that clinging to any external source for our happiness, whether it's people, places, or possessions, inevitably leads to suffering. The trap of expectations. The elderly man's story also reveals another layer of complexity: the weight of expectations. He had given his life to raising his children, making sacrifices and pouring his love into their upbringing. It seemed only natural to expect that they would now return that care in his old age. But when those expectations went unmet, they transformed into feelings of resentment and rejection. This pattern is common in families. Parents, out of love and duty, invest deeply in their children. Yet, as the Buddha taught, relationships are impermanent and ever-changing. Children grow, take on new roles, and navigate their own responsibilities. To cling to the idea that relationships should always stay the same is to resist the natural flow of life. This doesn't mean that love and care disappear. Rather, they evolve. The Buddha's teaching of anatta, or non-self, offers a profound insight here. We are not static beings. Our roles as parents, children, or caregivers are not fixed identities but shifting expressions of connection. Accepting this impermanence allows us to appreciate what is present without clinging to what was. A modern perspective. In today's fast-paced world, the traditional concept of multi-generational households has become increasingly rare. Work demands, geographic mobility, and the pressures of modern life often create physical and emotional distance between family members. This can leave elderly parents feeling isolated even when they live close to their children. Psychologists describe this phenomenon as proximity paradox. Being physically near someone without emotional closeness can amplify feelings of loneliness. The elderly man in our story experienced this firsthand. His happiness was tied to an expectation that proximity would naturally lead to connection. But when that didn't happen, his loneliness deepened. Modern technology offers solutions to some of these challenges. Video calls, group chats, and shared photos can bridge gaps in communication. Yet, no technology can replace the sense of fulfillment that comes from cultivating inner peace. Lessons from the Zen tradition. Zen teachings offer a valuable lens through which to view this dilemma. A well-known Zen parable tells of a monk who built a small hermitage near a village. People from the village visited him, bringing food and seeking wisdom. But over time, their visits became less frequent as they became absorbed in their own lives. When asked if he felt abandoned, the monk smiled and said, "I never expected them to come. Their presence is a gift, but their absence does not take away my peace." This story echoes the Buddha's teaching of the Four Noble Truths. The first truth acknowledges that suffering is part of life. The second reveals its cause, attachment and craving. The elderly man in our story was not suffering because of his children's actions, but because of his attachment to the idea that they should behave a certain way. The monk, on the other hand, found peace by letting go of expectations and finding contentment in his solitude. Finding inner refuge, the elderly man eventually began to reflect on his feelings. Through moments of meditation and quiet contemplation, he remembered a teaching from his youth. The source of true happiness is not outside you, but within. Slowly, he started to shift his focus inward. He began to find joy in small, simple moments. The warmth of the morning sun, the sound of birdsong, the rhythm of his breath during meditation. In modern terms, this practice is often referred to as mindfulness. By grounding ourselves in the present moment, we can step away from the cycle of longing and disappointment. Mindfulness helps us see the beauty in what we have rather than yearning for what we lack. The Buddha's Eightfold Path provides further guidance. Right understanding, right intention, and right mindfulness are particularly relevant here. They remind us to view our circumstances with clarity, cultivate intentions rooted in compassion, and stay present in the here and now. An invitation to reflect. As we consider the question of whether living near one's children guarantees happiness, it's worth pausing to reflect on our own lives. What expectations do we place on others to fulfill our emotional needs? How might we find greater peace by turning inward rather than outward? The elderly man's journey is a reminder that happiness is not about the proximity of others, but the depth of our connection to ourselves. When we release attachment and embrace the impermanence of life, we create space for genuine joy and gratitude. A gentle lesson. In the end, the elderly man did not find happiness in the way he expected, but he discovered something even more profound. By letting go of his longing for constant connection, he found peace within himself. His relationships with his children improved, not because they changed, but because he no longer relied on them to define his happiness. As we navigate our own paths, let us remember the wisdom of the Buddha. Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. In embracing this truth, we can approach life's challenges with grace and discover the boundless source of contentment that lies within us all. Section 2. The illusion of closeness, when proximity isn't enough. As humans, we often long for connection, believing that being physically close to someone will naturally bridge the gaps of emotional distance. But what happens when proximity doesn't deliver the intimacy we crave? When the warmth of relationships we imagined remains just out of reach? It's a question that speaks to a universal experience, one that invites us to examine the deeper truths about attachment and expectation. The story of an elderly man offers us a mirror for this exploration. Having moved near his children to escape the solitude of old age, he soon discovered that the closeness he longed for was more elusive than he had imagined. Let us walk with him through this journey and uncover the wisdom it offers. The man had spent years planning for his later life. His children, now grown with families of their own, had always been the center of his world. When the loneliness of an empty house became too much to bear, he packed up his belongings and moved to a neighborhood just minutes from his eldest child. In his mind, this was the solution. No more long stretches of silence, no more holidays spent alone. Just family, warmth, and love. At first, it seemed as though everything had fallen into place. The grandchildren visited often, their laughter filling his new home. His child stopped by regularly, bringing groceries and stories from work. The elderly man felt a sense of contentment he hadn't known in years. Yet, as time passed, the visits grew less frequent. The laughter faded into the background of busy schedules and commitments. He found himself alone once again, waiting for a knock on the door that rarely came. One evening, as he sat by his window watching the world outside, he couldn't help but wonder, why does it still feel like something is missing? Why does my heart feel so heavy when I'm so close to the people I love? This experience reflects a truth that many of us struggle to accept. Physical proximity doesn't always lead to emotional closeness. The elderly man's pain was not merely the absence of companionship, but the weight of his expectations. He had envisioned a life where his family would fill the void within him, but that vision did not align with reality. This misalignment between what he hoped for and what actually was became the root of his suffering. In Buddhism, this struggle is tied to the second noble truth. The origin of suffering is attachment. The elderly man's attachment wasn't just to his children, but to the idea that they could provide him with the happiness he sought. When that idea proved fragile, his sense of loss grew sharper. The Buddha once compared attachment to holding a red-hot coal in your hand. The tighter you grip it, the more it burns. The elderly man's expectations, like that coal, became a source of pain, not because his children failed him, but because he clung so tightly to the belief that their presence would fulfill him. As the days turned into weeks, the man began to retreat inward. He stopped calling his children as often, afraid of appearing needy. He spent his mornings tending to a small garden in his backyard and his evenings sitting quietly in meditation. One afternoon, as he watered a newly planted tree, he noticed how its leaves shimmered in the sunlight. He realized that the tree, though young and fragile, would grow in its own time, needing little from him beyond care and space. This simple moment of clarity brought him back to a teaching he had learned as a young man. Everything unfolds in its own rhythm, unbound by our desires. The concept of impermanence is central to Buddhist philosophy. It reminds us that all things, relationships, roles, even emotions, are transient. Clinging to the notion that something or someone will remain constant is like trying to hold water in our hands. The harder we grasp, the more it slips away. The elderly man began to see that his children's lives were like the flow of a river, constantly moving and changing course. To expect them to remain as they once were, fully devoted to his needs, was to resist the natural flow of life. His journey of understanding deepened one evening when his youngest grandchild visited him unexpectedly. The child, too young to sense the complexities of adult relationships, curled up beside him with a book. Together, they turned the pages, the room silent except for the soft rustle of paper. In that moment, the elderly man felt a joy that was not tethered to expectation. It wasn't about the frequency of visits or the roles they played in each other's lives. It was simply about being present. This moment reflects the Buddhist practice of mindfulness or sati. When we let go of the narratives we build around relationships and focus instead on the present moment, we create space for genuine connection. The man's bond with his grandchild wasn't diminished by the busyness of life. It was enriched by his ability to fully experience it when it came. As the elderly man continued to reflect, he found himself thinking about the law of karma. In Buddhism, karma is not about punishment or reward, but the natural consequences of our intentions and actions. He realized that his children were not neglecting him out of malice or indifference. Their lives were simply shaped by their own karmic paths. They juggled careers, families, and the challenges of modern life, just as he had in his younger years. Understanding this allowed him to release the resentment he had unknowingly harbored. With this shift in perspective came a profound sense of compassion. He began to see his children not as sources of his happiness, but as individuals walking their own journeys. The Metta Sutta, or the Buddha's teaching on loving kindness, became a guiding light for him. May all beings be happy. May they be free from suffering. These words softened his heart, allowing him to approach his relationships with generosity rather than expectation. In the months that followed, the man's life began to take on a new rhythm. He still cherished the moments he spent with his family, but he no longer waited for them to fill his days. Instead, he found fulfillment in simple acts of self-care and connection with his community. He joined a local group of retirees who met weekly for tea and conversation, sharing stories that reminded him of the universality of his experiences. One morning, as he meditated beneath the same tree he had planted months before, he felt a profound sense of peace. He realized that the love he had sought from his children had always been within him, waiting to be uncovered. By letting go of his attachments and embracing the impermanence of life, he had found a closeness that transcended proximity. The elderly man's story is a powerful reminder that happiness cannot be found in others. It must be cultivated within. The illusions we create about relationships often lead to disappointment, but by embracing Buddhist teachings on attachment, impermanence, and mindfulness, we can transform our suffering into wisdom. As you reflect on this journey, consider the expectations you may hold in your own relationships. Are you clinging to a specific outcome, or can you open your heart to what is as it is? Remember, true connection is not measured by distance or frequency, but by the presence we bring to each moment. May this story inspire you to look inward for the peace you seek and to approach your relationships with the grace of non-attachment. After all, as the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. Section 3. Breaking free from expectations. The roots of suffering. Expectations are like invisible threads. We weave them into our relationships, often without realizing it, believing they will hold us together. Yet, when these threads pull too tightly, they can fray and break, leaving us with feelings of disappointment and pain. This is especially true when it comes to the expectations parents place on their children, born out of love but often burdened by unspoken hopes for reciprocity. The story of an elderly man offers a poignant example. Having devoted his life to raising his children, he saw their success as his own and their happiness as a reflection of his sacrifices. As he entered old age, he expected their care and attention in return. After all, wasn't it only fair? But life doesn't always align with our ideas of fairness. When his children, caught up in their own responsibilities, didn't meet his expectations, he felt neglected and hurt. This pain wasn't from their actions alone, but from the weight of his expectations that had gone unmet. Buddhist philosophy teaches us that suffering arises not from external circumstances, but from within. The second noble truth identifies craving and attachment as the roots of suffering. In the man's case, his attachment to the idea of how his children should behave, how they should express their love, became the source of his pain. This isn't to say his feelings were invalid, but they were compounded by his inability to let go of those expectations. One of the Buddha's most profound teachings is that everything is impermanent, including the roles we play in each other's lives. As parents, it's natural to pour your heart into your children, but clinging to the belief that they owe you something in return can lead to a cycle of resentment and disconnection. This is the lesson of non-attachment, or upekkha. It doesn't mean loving less. It means loving without strings attached, allowing relationships to evolve naturally. In modern terms, the man's struggle can be likened to the concept of emotional outsourcing, placing your happiness in the hands of others. This dependency creates a fragile dynamic, where any deviation from expectations feels like betrayal. Instead, the Buddhist path offers a way out, a focus on cultivating inner peace rather than relying on external validation. When we release others from the weight of our expectations, we also release ourselves from the chains of disappointment. The man's journey wasn't easy. At first, he resisted the idea that he needed to let go. It felt like a betrayal of his love for his children. But through meditation and reflection, he began to understand that his expectations were not a measure of his love but of his ego. By letting go, he found a new kind of freedom, one where his relationships could flourish without being weighed down by unspoken demands. This is the essence of the Buddha's Eightfold Path, particularly the practice of right intention and right mindfulness. By approaching relationships with an open heart and without attachment, we create space for genuine connection. The man's story reminds us that when we stop clinging to what we think we deserve, we make room for gratitude and compassion. As you reflect on this, ask yourself, what expectations do I carry in my relationships? How might letting go of these expectations bring me closer to inner peace? The answers may surprise you, offering a path not only to personal liberation but also to deeper, more meaningful connections with those you love. Section 4. The Dangers of Dependence. Finding strength in solitude. There's a certain comfort in leaning on others, a sense of security that comes from knowing someone will catch us if we fall. But what happens when that leaning becomes dependence? When we hand over the responsibility for our happiness to someone else, we risk losing the strength to stand on our own. This delicate balance is at the heart of another lesson from the elderly man's story. After moving close to his children, the man began to rely on them for emotional support. At first, it felt natural. They were his family, his lifeline to the world outside his quiet home. But as time went on and their visits became less frequent, he felt an ache of abandonment. He had placed his happiness in their hands, and when they couldn't meet his needs, he felt adrift. This experience mirrors a common human tendency, seeking fulfillment from external sources. In Buddhist teachings, this is described as craving, a form of attachment that ties our well-being to things outside ourselves. The third noble truth offers a path to liberation. Letting go of this craving leads to the cessation of suffering. For the man, this meant realizing that his children could not bear the full weight of his emotional needs. It was a burden too great for any relationship to sustain. The Dhammapada reminds us, your own self is your master. Who else could be? This wisdom highlights the importance of self-reliance, not as a rejection of relationships but as a foundation for them. When we cultivate inner strength, we can engage with others from a place of wholeness rather than need. Modern psychology echoes this idea. Emotional independence is a cornerstone of mental health, allowing us to weather life's challenges without losing our equilibrium. The man's dependence on his children was not unusual, but it limited his ability to find joy in solitude. His journey towards self-reliance began with small steps, spending time in meditation, tending to his garden, and rediscovering hobbies that brought him quiet satisfaction. One day, as he walked through a nearby park, he noticed an elderly woman sitting on a bench, knitting with serene concentration. They struck up a conversation, and she shared her philosophy. Happiness is like knitting, she said. You can't depend on someone else to finish your stitches. You have to do the work yourself, one loop at a time. Her words stayed with him, a simple yet profound reminder of the power of self-sufficiency. The Buddhist principle of mindfulness played a crucial role in his transformation. By focusing on the present moment, he began to appreciate the small joys of his day: birds singing in the morning, the warmth of sunlight on his skin, the gentle rhythm of his breath. These moments of mindfulness became anchors, helping him build a sense of inner stability. Over time, the man's relationships with his children began to change. Without the pressure of his dependence, they felt freer to connect with him out of love rather than obligation. Their visits became more meaningful, their conversations more genuine. By finding strength in solitude, he had not only liberated himself but also created space for healthier, more balanced relationships. This journey underscores an essential truth. Solitude is not loneliness. It is the ability to be at peace with your own company, to find contentment within rather than searching for it elsewhere. The man's story invites us to consider our own lives. Are we leaning too heavily on others for happiness? How might we cultivate the inner strength to stand on our own? As you reflect on these questions, remember the wisdom of the Buddha. Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. By embracing solitude and building self-reliance, we can discover a wellspring of resilience and joy that no external circumstance can diminish. And in that discovery, we find not only ourselves but also the freedom to love others without conditions or constraints. Section 5. Letting go, the freedom of non-attachment. The idea of letting go can feel daunting, as if releasing our hold on something we cherish might mean losing it forever. But what if letting go is not about losing, but about gaining freedom? What if it is the key to a deeper, purer form of love and connection? One that isn't bound by the weight of expectation or fear. The elderly man's story offers a window into this truth. After years of clinging to the hope that his children would provide the comfort and companionship he sought, he began to notice the toll his attachment was taking, not only on himself but on his relationships. The harder he held on, the more distant his children seemed. His yearning for closeness had unintentionally created a barrier. One quiet evening, as he sat in meditation, the memory of a Buddhist teaching surfaced. To love fully, one must release all clinging. At first, this seemed counterintuitive. How could love exist without attachment? But as he sat with this thought, he began to understand that clinging wasn't love. It was fear. It was the fear of loss, the fear of being alone, the fear of insignificance. True love, he realized, required the courage to let go. In Buddhist philosophy, non-attachment is not about apathy or indifference. It is about loving without trying to possess, giving without expecting anything in return, and being present without grasping for permanence. The Eightfold Path, particularly right intention and right mindfulness, guides us toward this balance. By aligning our hearts and minds with compassion and clarity, we can love more deeply, unburdened by the chains of desire and expectation. The man began to practice this in small ways. When his children didn't visit as often as he hoped, he chose to focus on the joy of the moments they did share rather than lamenting the time apart. When his grandchildren grew too busy to call, he found comfort in the knowledge that they were thriving in their own lives. Slowly, he released the grip of attachment, and in doing so, he discovered something unexpected. His relationships began to flourish. By letting go, he no longer projected his fears or needs onto his family. This created space for genuine connection, where love flowed freely without the weight of obligation. His children noticed the change. They no longer felt the unspoken pressure of meeting his expectations, and this newfound ease brought them closer together. This transformation highlights a profound truth. Non-attachment doesn't distance us from others. It brings us closer. When we release the need to control or cling, we allow love to exist in its purest form. The man's journey is a reminder that the freedom of letting go is not about severing ties, but about strengthening them through authenticity and mutual respect. As you reflect on this story, consider where you might be holding on too tightly in your own life. What fears or expectations are tethering your relationships? How might releasing them open the door to deeper love and connection? The wisdom of non-attachment invites us to embrace life's flow with an open heart, unafraid of its impermanence. Section 6. Embracing Impermanence. The art of accepting change. There is a beauty in impermanence, though it often hides behind our resistance to change. We long for stability, for things to stay as they are when they bring us joy or comfort. But life, like the seasons, is in constant motion, and clinging to the illusion of permanence only deepens our suffering. The elderly man, through his journey, came face to face with this truth. His relationships with his children were no longer what they once were. They had grown from the dependent bonds of childhood to the independent dynamics of adulthood. At first, this shift felt like a loss of control, of purpose, of the roles that had defined him for so long. But as he began to reflect on the teachings of impermanence, his perspective began to shift. The Buddha taught that all conditioned things are transient. In the Dhammapada it is written, "All created things perish. Strive on with diligence." This is not a call to despair, but an invitation to embrace life's fleeting nature with awareness and gratitude. The man realized that by clinging to the past, wishing for the closeness he once had with his children, he was missing the beauty of the present moment. One afternoon, as he sat beneath a tree in his garden, he noticed the leaves falling gently to the ground. Each leaf, unique in its shape and color, had completed its cycle. The tree did not mourn its loss. It simply let the leaves go, knowing that new growth would come in time. This simple observation became a profound metaphor for his own life. His role as a parent had changed, but it was not an end, it was a transformation. Modern life often pulls us away from this awareness. We live in a world that prizes permanence, whether in careers, relationships, or material possessions. But the truth is that nothing remains the same. The man's acceptance of impermanence allowed him to let go of the pain of what once was and open himself to the possibilities of what could be. By embracing change, he began to see his children's independence not as a loss but as a testament to the love and care he had given them. Their ability to navigate their own lives was a reflection of the foundation he had helped build. This shift in perspective brought him peace. Impermanence also taught him to cherish the small, everyday moments. He found joy in simple things: the warmth of sunlight, the laughter of a neighbor, the serenity of his garden. These moments, though fleeting, became treasures because he experienced them fully without clinging. The Buddhist principle of mindfulness, being present in the here and now, guided him through this transition. By focusing on the present rather than longing for the past or fearing the future, he cultivated a sense of peace that transcended the ebb and flow of life's changes. As his understanding deepened, the man began to share his insights with others. When his children visited, he spoke of gratitude rather than longing. When friends asked about his solitude, he spoke of the richness of his inner life. His acceptance of impermanence became a source of strength and inspiration, not just for himself but for those around him. This journey invites us to ask, what changes in our lives are we resisting? How might embracing impermanence help us navigate these transitions with grace? The art of accepting change is not about giving up but about opening up, allowing life's natural rhythms to guide us toward growth and renewal. In the end, the man found peace not by holding on to what was but by embracing what is. His story reminds us that impermanence is not a threat but a gift. It teaches us to let go of fear, to appreciate the present, and to find beauty in life's ever-changing flow. May this wisdom inspire you to face life's transitions with courage and to see the beauty in every fleeting moment. Section 7. From Loneliness to Solitude, Discovering Joy Within. Loneliness is a word that carries a heavy weight. It speaks of absence, of people, connection, and warmth. Yet solitude, a word so similar, can carry a profoundly different meaning. Solitude is not about what is missing, but about what is present. The self, the stillness, and the vast, untapped potential within. How, then, can we transform the ache of loneliness into the serenity of solitude? This is the journey of one elderly man who found joy not by seeking others, but by discovering himself. In the quiet of his days, the man often felt the pangs of loneliness. Moving closer to his children had not brought the closeness he had hoped for. His house, though near theirs, often echoed with the same silence he had tried to escape. There were mornings when the stillness of the air felt suffocating, and evenings when the shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should. It was in one such moment of despair that a question arose in his mind. Is this silence my enemy, or could it be my teacher? This question lingered in his thoughts. He remembered a saying from the Buddha, "The way is not in the sky, the way is in the heart." What if the connection he sought was not external but internal? What if the peace he longed for could be found within the very solitude he was trying to escape? The man began to approach his solitude with curiosity rather than resistance. Each morning he sat in meditation, focusing on his breath. At first, the stillness was overwhelming. His mind wandered to memories of busier days, to moments of laughter with his children, to fears about the future. But slowly, with practice, the chatter of his thoughts began to quiet. He found himself noticing things he had overlooked: the sound of birdsong outside his window, the gentle rustle of leaves, the rhythmic beating of his own heart. These moments, though small, became profound. They were reminders that life, even in its quietest form, was still full of beauty. In Buddhism, mindfulness, or sati, is a practice of being fully present in the moment. The man's meditation became a gateway to mindfulness. He began to carry this awareness into his daily life. When he prepared his meals, he noticed the vibrant colors of the vegetables, the texture of the rice, the aroma of spices. When he walked in his garden, he felt the earth beneath his feet, the warmth of the sun on his face. These simple acts, once mundane, became sources of joy. One day, while tending to a small flowering plant, he was struck by its resilience. Despite being battered by wind and rain, it continued to grow, its leaves reaching toward the light. The plant's quiet strength mirrored something within him, a reminder that solitude, like the soil, can be a place of growth if we nurture it with care. The man also turned to the teachings of the Dhammapada, where the Buddha says, "Better it is to live alone. There is no companionship with a fool. Let a man walk alone. Let him commit no sin with few wishes, like an elephant in the forest." These words resonated deeply. They were not a rejection of relationships, but an invitation to embrace the self as a companion. To walk alone, not out of necessity, but out of choice and wisdom. His solitude became a space for self-discovery. He revisited hobbies he had long neglected, like painting and writing. These creative acts were not about achieving perfection, but about expressing himself, exploring his thoughts and feelings in ways he had never done before. Through this process, he began to understand that the loneliness he had felt was not a lack of others, but a lack of connection to himself. The transformation from loneliness to solitude also brought a new perspective to his relationships. He no longer sought his children's company out of desperation. Instead, he approached their time together with gratitude, seeing each visit as a gift rather than an obligation. This shift in attitude lightened the atmosphere, allowing their interactions to become more genuine and joyful. The principles of the Eightfold Path guided him through this transition, particularly right mindfulness and right effort. By focusing on the present and putting effort into his personal growth, he found a sense of balance. He began to understand that solitude was not a state to endure, but an opportunity to embrace. It was in solitude that he found clarity, strength, and a deeper sense of purpose. His journey also echoed a story from the Buddhist tradition, the story of the Bodhisattva who meditated under a tree, finding enlightenment not through others, but through introspection. The Bodhisattva's solitude was not isolation, but communion with the truths of existence. Similarly, the man's solitude became a path to wisdom. He realized that his worth was not tied to his relationships, but to his ability to live with compassion and authenticity. As time passed, the man's life became a testament to the power of solitude. He was no longer afraid of silence. Instead, he welcomed it as a friend, a space where he could reflect, grow, and simply be. The peace he found within began to radiate outward, touching the lives of those around him. His children noticed the change in him, drawn not by his neediness but by his calm and steady presence. The transformation from loneliness to solitude is a journey available to all of us. It begins with a simple shift in perspective, from seeing solitude as emptiness to seeing it as fullness. It requires us to sit with our discomfort, to listen to the whispers of our hearts, and to trust that within the stillness lies a wellspring of strength and joy. As you consider this story, ask yourself, how do I view my own moments of solitude? Are they a source of anxiety, or could they become a source of peace? What small steps might I take to cultivate mindfulness and embrace the present moment? The answers to these questions hold the key to discovering the joy within. The man's story reminds us that we are never truly alone. Within each of us is a boundless capacity for connection, not only to others but to ourselves and the world around us. May his journey inspire you to find beauty in the quiet spaces of your life, to turn inward with compassion, and to walk your path with grace and courage. As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. Let this truth guide you toward a life of serenity, purpose, and unshakable joy, finding wisdom in the quiet moments. As the elderly man in our story discovered, true happiness doesn't come from where we live or who we live near. It comes from how we live. It's found in the quiet moments when we embrace the present, in the strength we build by letting go of expectations, and in the peace we nurture within ourselves. Life, like a river, is always moving. Our roles and relationships evolve with time, and clinging to what once was only leads to suffering. Instead, the wisdom of Buddhist philosophy teaches us to embrace impermanence, practice non-attachment, and find joy in solitude. These lessons are not just for the elderly, but for all of us navigating the complex, beautiful path of human existence. So, as you reflect on this story, ask yourself, what expectations might I be holding on to that could be weighing me down? How can I create more peace within myself, regardless of my external circumstances? Let this video be a gentle reminder that the ultimate source of happiness lies not in others, but within your own heart. If this message resonated with you, I encourage you to share it with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to like this video, leave a comment below with your reflections, and subscribe to Lotus Light Teachings for more insights on Buddhist philosophy, life wisdom, and personal growth. Thank you for joining me today. May your journey be filled with peace, clarity, and joy. Until next time, take care and be well.